I wanted to talk about social studies and reflect a little bit about how I changed in terms of being a social studies educator over the course of the semester. Um, at the elementary level, when I was in elementary school, I always really enjoyed a lot of the social studies components that we used in my school. I went to a school that was based on multiple intelligences, so we didn't have clear subjects, but they definitely incorporated social studies into all of the other subjects that we studied in the classroom. So something that I know already that I need to grow upon is to continue to develop my yearly goals and my career goals. I know that throughout the course of my career, I would like to continue to grow in my teaching of social studies and to move it beyond trying to study too much and only getting an inch deep into it. I think that maybe a lot of the reasons behind students not liking social studies is because their main familiarity with it could be through rote memorization, such as memorizing maps or just taking tests or quizzes, mainly looking at social studies concepts through textbooks. I also think a lot of students are under the idea that social studies is simply geography. Maybe they don't get the chance to act as geologists very often, or to act in terms of any of the other social studies components that we looked at this semester. For my specific lesson, something that I wanted to incorporate was to have the students look very, very closely at the United States, where they are now. One of the first things I remember about our social studies class were all the social studies concepts that we looked at from the very beginning of the class, as well as the 5 institutions. We also looked at 21st century skills, and in our debate we argued whether or not the new standards should be adopted or whether or not the older standards. The new standards are certainly new in that they definitely push the students beyond the traditional limits of social studies. I personally was glad that I had the chance to argue in support of those new standards. I think that it is definitely important that students learn to become active citizens, and that was definitely at the heart of this lesson, was to have them first consider a place different than where they are, to consider a society that is different from American society, to see the similarities between that society and ours, while also contemplating those differences across the institutions. My child study who participated in my social studies lesson, he talked a lot about, during our reviews, he talked a lot about history terms, for example. So I could already see that he was a student who was interested in multiculturalism. We talked about Russian culture. I myself studied Russian literature in my undergrad experience at Smith. So him and I were able to have very interesting conversations about Russian culture and about French culture, since I studied French and Spanish and Russian while I was at Smith. So he really helped to inform my decision in terms of what I wanted to hit upon in my social studies lesson. I think that I still need to grow upon the actual organization of my social studies lessons. I tried to make the lesson as structured as possible, but I think that if I'd had more time to do the lesson, I probably would have done it over the course of a couple of days. I think that having the students jump right in and think about American society, American institutions within American society might have been a little difficult for them since they had just been introduced to the institutions. So ideally, I probably would spend one day just on the actual 5 institutions themselves, not looking at them within any particular context, but really just looking at those 5 institutions and looking at how they exist in different societies. I would, at that point, introduce a society different from American society to give an example, to show, to model for them the ways in which other societies have these institutions, not just American society. And then the second day I would do what I did in the second part of my lesson, which was to have them role play, have each one of them represent an institution. Um, Something that I want to incorporate into my social studies pedagogy is definitely making use of the multiple intelligences. I think that social studies lends itself very well to the multiple intelligences. I think that students um, have the opportunity to use those different intelligences, especially in social studies, because you when you study people and you study culture, um, there's different components that create that culture, the music and the art and the mathematics and the ideas and the different contributions that people make to that culture. So for me, multiculturalism is definitely the focus. I have a general goal, an overarching goal for students to be aware, not only be aware of multiculturalism, but to recognize the different ways that people live and the different ways that people are similar to each other. Um, what I liked that the students did in my social studies lesson was that they, after having this discussion with 5 institutions, they went back to a couple of those institutions and they started to look at their immediate environment. We were talking about government, and one student had made a list of certain components of government, and one of the other students started to talk about Meredith School itself. This kind of led to a discussion where I led a form of questioning. I asked certain questions about Meredith itself and about the rules and I guess the laws, so to speak, within Meredith, why we have them, why they're important. And it was just interesting to hear them switch between this larger idea, this big idea of American society and the 5 institutions within American society, and then whittling that down just to their immediate neighborhood, their school, how their school itself is an institution. And as you'll see on the student reflection page, the student who had education and institution had some very interesting thoughts about that, and he really also used French society to inform some of his thinking, and that's something that I definitely want to continue to grow in as an educator. I want my students, when they're thinking about social studies, when they are doing lessons on social studies, I want them to be aware of these connections across cultures, across different groups of people. And that was something that this student did particularly well. So that's just a little bit about my social studies lesson. I hope that you enjoy the student reflection page.